I want to enjoy my relationship with God and his people, and trust that he's finishing his work in me. He's going to make me like Jesus. And like, that's the most authentic self that I can be. And I can live in that way right now as the unique image bearer that he created.
I wanted to start out more like kind of bigger picture before we dive more into the connection with trauma. So going more like bird's eye view, how can someone go about considering if there is a theology for things we're coming into contact with in our culture? So trauma being an example, authentic self is another example I think of that we come up against. So how do we go about like, okay, is there a theology that I should be considering in relation to this topic?
Yeah. So like terms, ideas that are related to how we understand like the human person, problems we face as humans. Is that kind of what you're referencing?
Yeah. So we can hear these more like because they can seem to come more out of like secular terminology where like it's a cultural thing. Like, oh, this seems to be like just a hot topic right now, or trauma is not just a hot topic, it's a major issue. But it can come across sometimes to the church, I think, as, okay, wait, this is some new thing that people are talking about. In reality, maybe just the terminology is new, or maybe the terminology is just finally catching up to the prevalence. And I've seen like pushback at certain times within the church, big C, kind of spread out all over of like, well, wait, what is this? Is it something that is actually biblically grounded? Is there a way to use the Bible to actually look at it, then know how to respond versus what can sometimes happen, which is just to be really dismissive and be like, oh, well, that's not a real thing. Like I've heard that about spiritual abuse. Like, oh, spiritual abuse isn't real. It's not in the Bible. Well, it's true that the term spiritual abuse is not in the Bible, but the Bible is just soaked with spiritual abuse. A lot in the Old Testament. We got it in the New Testament. I mean, with lots of examples. I actually did a class. It was an independent study where I had to go through the Bible and give all the examples. And it's like a massive, massive list. I'm not laughing because it's funny that it's a massive list. It's just like, whoa, it's overwhelming. And so that's sort of to give you a little of the background about some of like the conversation that can happen. And so how would someone even connect with like, okay, I'm culturally hearing this, like I'm hearing about trauma. Is this like a thing that fits into my biblical worldview? How do I go about this?
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I love that question. I think in terms of like a short answer, I think we're safe to assume that there's theology for everything that relates to human persons, right? So because God created the world and everything in it, including us as his image bearers, every part of our existence relates to him. So who we are, how we function, how we relate to other people, like everything about us is from God and before God and towards God. So I would say like, yeah, there's theology that comes to bear on everything that touches human existence or is part of human existence. So those ideas, like terms that we hear in like that seem to come from popular culture or other sources, they're coming at us, kind of like those, like a Visa gift card, you get with someone's like preloaded value on it, and you get the card, but it's got this preloaded value. The terms that we hear, like authentic self, it's coming with a preloaded set of values. That's already like, there's already some kind of meaning related to God involved, even if it's like God is not involved with the view of authentic self that's coming at me. Like there is a view of God attached to that. So what I think is helpful for us to do is to use theology from Scripture as faithfully as we can, right? Be understanding theology, constructing our theology from Scripture, and then using that to evaluate the meaning of these terms that are coming at us or ideas. And so, there may be things we can affirm and other things that we would want to do our best work to try to reframe. So like with that example of authentic self, or like the language of being true to yourself, I would want to be asking, well, what is the authentic self, and who decides what that means? What does it mean to be true to yourself? And how a person would answer those questions, then there's points for us to then discuss, okay, like how does that relate to what scripture says about who we are, what it means to be truly human, how we understand ourselves in relation to God. And so taking the term and viewing that kind of as a package of ideas rather than just like one term, perhaps. But how do we look at this whole package of ideas and go, oh, I could affirm this, deny this. So like, for example, within the package of ideas related to authentic self, there's probably some value there that a person would mean, right? If a person is, I'm thinking of conversations with people, right? So like a person is using the term authentic self, that's where I'm interacting. Like I'm not interacting with all of culture, but just this person uses this term. I want to understand, what do you mean by that? And probably there's some kind of value in our uniqueness. Like you're a unique person, a unique individual, and you should live in that uniqueness. So there's an aspect of that. Like I could totally affirm God created us in his image, and he displays just creative genius in the diversity of making billions of unique people. And he wants us to flourish in living out that identity that he's created for us. And so I don't want to live out my own idea of whatever authentic self I think I should be, but I want to look to see, okay, what has God designed me to be? Who has God designed me to be? It's not like my own self-determined idea, but the truest humanity, like the truest self, is the unique person God created me to be, and redeemed and gifted for service in unique ways. And I want to enjoy my relationship with God and his people, and trust that he's finishing his work in me. He's going to make me like Jesus. And like, that's the most authentic self that I can be. And I can live in that way right now as the unique image bearer that he created. So yeah, that's kind of just maybe a one way I would want to think about a term like that, and then could apply to lots of different things. But I don't know, does that does that answer, or does that help?
Yes. Yeah. And it's a great example, because what you did was basically said, okay, how is the term being used? I love the preloaded gift card idea of like, it is coming preloaded. And some of these terms can be like really loaded, especially like depending on the society that they're being used within, and what, all the feels and things that can be connected with them. And so it is preloaded, and there can be maybe an overall general definition, and yet people can be kind of doing their own things with it a bit. And so always asking, like, what do you mean by that, is helpful, just to make sure we are speaking the same language with someone else. And when I look at generally how authentic self is being used in the United States, to narrow it down, I don't know if this term is being used everywhere in the same way. But here within the US, generally speaking, there's going to be aspects of authentic self that I would reject when I'm looking at it through the lens of the Bible. Like the self is basically higher than everything else. Like that I wouldn't agree with, where we're like, oh, okay, now all of a sudden, like, me being me is the most important thing. And it's not really about who God made me to be anymore. It's just about me being whatever it is I think that day or feel that day, and not wanting to honor and glorify the Lord. So it's like, okay, that would be a piece of it I would reject. Everything that you shared, Laura Lee, is exactly what I would talk with people about. And I do talk with people about that a lot. Like, this is really authentically, who we are as children of God. And here's like ways to think about it. So what we're doing, everyone, is we're taking the information, we're like, okay, let's assess this through a biblical lens. What what does stay, what maybe is a bit twisted, and what maybe is complete garbage and when held up to the Bible and actually has to go. And it takes some mental work to do that. And we may have some emotional stuff that comes up as we do that as well. And yet it is the life of the Christian, and we get to slow down. We get to take our time. Like we get to seek out wise counsel and dig into the scriptures ourselves, be prayerful and kind of seek, okay, what are people saying? What are the conversations that are going on out there? And so for our audience, who I know has come out of a lot of stuff, a big reminder of this does not have to be a rush. This does not have to be a bunch of stuff that gets completed overnight. Like the Lord is with us as we journey and we continue to seek him. And so we get to also rest knowing that we are doing our best. And our best is because of Jesus, it is going to be good enough. Outside of Jesus, my best would not be good enough, but with Jesus, my best is going to be good enough. So we're trying here. I talked a lot about reasonable best. So yeah, I agree too that there can be a theology. I mean, we're looking at, is there a theology of these topics? Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a way to think biblically about everything. And so I appreciate you bringing attention to that too.